He hadn't wanted war, he really hadn't. The stars were beautiful, full of silence, and promised the kind of place a man could disappear and start over. Breathe. That's all Captain Drew Haverson ever wanted, some damn peace. But peace is a foreign word when you're human, and surrounded by aliens who see your kind as a virus. The Varan Empire, sleek and serpentine with cold green eyes, called Earth a primitive anomaly. They smiled during the accords, shook hands, then sent warships, cloaked in shadow, to bomb out colonies in the outer rings. Mars first, then Titan families turned to ash in a vacuum, no warning, no reason, no mercy. Drew had lost everything on Mars, his brother, his niece, even his dog. For God's sake, it wasn't just war, it was slaughter. And when he looked into the council chambers for justice, they gave him politics speeches, more handshakes. You must understand, Captain Haverson, the Chancellor of Orion Belt stammered, her eyes glazed with fear. We can't retaliate, the Varun are too powerful. Too powerful, that's what they always said, like humans weren't made of blood, fire, and stubbornness, like being outnumbered meant lying down and dying quietly. Not for Drew that night. He walked out of the council chambers stripped of rank, honor, and command, but the fire in his chest had never burned hotter. They wanted war, he'd give them something they'd never forget. He didn't need approval, he didn't need armies, he needed a ship, a cause. And the hatred that lived behind his teeth. They took Earth's pride. He'd take their planets. He started small, a stolen freighter, some black market nukes from edge of the Andromeda, drift smugglers, mercs, exiled engineers, anyone who'd lost something to the Varan, and didn't mind painting entire skies red. He found them in backroom bars and prison mines. He spoke with quiet fury, and they followed. They called themselves Ashper, not soldiers, not rebels, survivors turned executioners. The first Varan moon fell in silence, no warning, no trace, just a crater, where once stood a city of glass. The second was louder, broadcasted across the galactic net. As Drew stood over the ashes, blood, smeared and snarling into the camera. You want war, then watch your worlds burn. He didn't hide, he dared them to chase him, and they did, but Drew had studied them, learned how they thought, how they moved. Varan's strategy was elegance and precision, his was chaos and hatred. They underestimated how much rage a human could carry across galaxies. Each time they came for him, they lost more than ships, they lost planets. The Galactic Council began whispering his name like a curse. The Varan called him the Scourge, but Drew didn't care. He wasn't here for titles, he wasn't here to win. He was here to end them. Every bomb dropped was a memory, every city torched was a voice crying out from Mars. And as the void burned with the fire of dying stars, Drew stood on the bridge of his battered cruiser, breathing heavy, staring at the map ahead. Next was Varan Prime, the heart of the Empire, and he would rip it out with his bare hands, if he had to. The Ashborn cruiser Vengeance arc cut through the void like a blade too jagged for peace. Its hull was a patchwork of stolen tech, its weapons stripped from the ruins of enemies, ugly, brutal, but alive like Drew. He stood at the helm, gripping the rails, as the stars, dragged by sweat, clung to his brow. Not from fear, he hadn't felt that in a long time, but from pressure, his bones etched from old wounds, his heart from older ones. Update. He barked, his second coil stepped forward, not military, not trained, just another broken soul with a rifle and a reason. Unfleet scrambled near Hawk 9, 2 cruisers, 1 carrier, all heading for Ver. Unprime. Drew narrowed his eyes. They're pulling back. Kale nodded. Seems like it. After we dusted that logistics moon. They're panicking. Drew exhaled, not a sigh, just a release. He liked panic. Panic made people stupid. What's the casualty report? He asked, not because he cared about numbers, but because he cared about what was being lost, what he was breaking. Kyle's voice lowered. Rough estimate 1.2 million Varun civilians, non-combat. Drew looked out the viewing screen. The galaxy looked peaceful from here, serene. It was a lie. Everything was always burning. Just depends on how close you were standing. Good. He muttered, they need to learn. Kyle hesitated. You sure about that, Cap? I mean civilians. Drew turned slowly. Were the kids on Mars not civilians? Kyle dropped his eyes. Did the Varun warn before they firebombed half of Titan? Kale clenched his jaw but said nothing. Let me tell you something. Drew growled, this isn't a war for territory, this is genocide. The Varan wanted us erased. They just didn't think we'd claw back from the grave and spit in their eye. He leaned in. So yeah, I'm sure, until their people cry louder than ours. Did they won't stop? Kyle gave a short nod and walked off. The others on the bridge stayed quiet. They'd heard it all before. Some believed it, others just needed the paycheck, or the revenge, or a place to belong. Drew didn't judge. He wasn't a good man. Good men died back on Mars in his quarters. The only light came from old photos burned into hollow pads. His brother with his daughter, both smiling in the red dust of the Martian sun. Eyes a dog with one ear up, one flopped sideways. He touched the screen with calloused fingers. I'll burn them all. He whispered every single one. That night he called a war council, or what passed for 13 captains, each commanding a piece of the Ashborn fleet. All had blood on their hands, all had ghosts behind their eyes. Drew stepped to the center of the long metal room. There. Unprime, that's our next target. Murmurs, raised brows, a few outright gasps. You're insane. Someone said it was Rex, the captain of Midnight. Grin, tall, scarred, and missing half a jaw from a Varun sniper. No, Drew said coolly. I'm done playing your talking about attacking their homeworld. Another voice chimed in. Do you know how fortified it is? The orbital defenses alone. We're not going to win a battle. Drew interrupted. We're going to make a statement. Silence. He stepped forward. Every time they strike, they think we'll take it, that we'll negotiate, that we'll sit and bleed, while they smile behind polished words. I'm done bleeding. He activated a hollow map. There. Unprime blinked at center. I've got the code's coordinates, entry patterns. Took them off a council diplomat who didn't survive interrogation. A few chuckled grimly. 3 jumps through the Draken Rift. And we're in. We won't last long. Once we're there, but we don't need to. What's the plan? Kyle asked. We hit the surface. Capital District governmental sector. Leave nothing standing. We won't hold the world. We'll turn their throne into a crater. And the civilians? Another voice asked carefully. Drew didn't blink. Collateral. No one spoke. No one argued. They knew the score. They'd crossed too many lines to pretend they had morals left. The jump through the Dreen Rift was a suicide run. The rift tore smaller ships apart, twisted space like it hated logic. But Drew's ship held barely. They exited near Varun Prime's orbit. The planet was beautiful rings like frozen rainbows, oceans so wide they reflected starlight like mirrored cities floating on metal spires above forests untouched for millennia. The heart of the Empire. Kale stared. We're really doing this? Drew nodded. Fire up the drums. Massive silos on Vengeance Arc hissed to life. War heads older than the Alliance. Black market antimatter bombs so volatile even pirates refused to use them. Drew had 8. He planned to use all of them. The Varun fleet saw them too late. Drew's ships spread like a disease across orbit, releasing chaos into the calm. Dog fights tore through the sky. There. Undefense systems activated, but the Ashborn didn't fight fair. They hijacked systems, jammed frequencies, sent ghost signals into their networks. As the battle exploded in orbit, Drew took a drop shuttle to the surface with 20 of his most suicidal fighters straight into the capital. They landed in fire. The city erupted around them. Siren screams, flashes of violet light from there. Unpulsed weapons. Drew moved like a shadow with a rifle. No mercy, no hesitation. Every corridor was a memory of Mars. Every fallen Varun was one step closer to vengeance. They reached the Grand Palace, an ivory tower lined with gold and glass. Drew planted 3 warheads at its base. The Varun governor was captured trying to flee. Drew dragged him into the chamber where the bombs blinked with soft red lights. You remember Mars? Drew asked him. The governor hissed, defiant to the end. You're a savage. Drew leaned in close, blood dripping from his armor. We were farmers, miners, scientists, kids. You made us monsters. Now choke on it. He shot the governor in the chest. No ceremony, just closure from orbit. Kale watched the palace collapse in on itself. A tidal wave of fire rolled through the capital. Drew's shuttle barely made it out, scarred, smoking, but alive. The Ashborn fleet scattered as Varun reinforcements arrived. Some ships made it out, others didn't. But the message was clear. Varun Prime was bleeding for the first time in centuries. The Empire was afraid. Back in deep space, Drew sat alone, his face bruised, his armor cracked. But his eyes gleamed. Kyle brought him a flask. You did it? No, Drew said. I started it. Kyle tilted his head. What now? Drew looked out the viewport. The galaxy shimmered with light, planets full of people, some innocent, some not. They'll come for us harder now, Kyle warned. I hope they do, Drew said. He took a slow sip from the flask and whispered to no one in particular. You want war? Then watch your worlds burn. They called it the Day of Black Suns. The galactic net was flooded with images. Smoke Rising from Varun Prime's capital, ash falling like snow cities, crumbled children, cried politicians, wept behind steel walls. One photo went viral, Drew Haverson, silhouetted in flames, holding a Varun banner upside down with a scorched rifle in his other hand. The media turned him into a monster, some called him a war criminal, others a ghost, but for those who had lost everything, those forgotten by peace treaties and cold councils, Drew became something more. He became the answer. After the palace fell, Drew vanished into the stars, no trace, no signal. The Ashbur scattered across uncharted sectors, split into cells, each with their own methods, their own vendettas. What began as vengeance became docked. And leave nothing sacred, strike without warning. Fear is the first weapon, fire is the second. They hit supply routes, torched outposts, sabotaged peace talks, and every time the Varun tried to retaliate, the humans hit harder, meaner, smarter. Even the most advanced technology couldn't match the cold, bloody creativity of desperate humans who had nothing left to lose. Drew didn't stop, couldn't he? No longer wanted justice. He wanted legacy. Aboard the Vengeance Ark, Kyle stormed into Drew's quarters. Hit face grim. We need to talk. Drew sat by the window staring into nothing. Talk. Kale tossed the pad onto the table. This isn't strategy anymore, it's slaughter. Drew didn't even blink. Good. They killed a senator's entire family. Drew, not a soldier, not a general, a wife and her 2 daughters. They signed the orders for Mars, Drew said coldly. They toasted to it in their halls. There are no civilians in Empire Building. Kyle shook his head. We were soldiers, fighters, survivors. Now we're butchers. Drew finally turned his voice low, but laced with steel. You think they cared when they burned our colonies, when they experimented on our prisoners? I held a man in my arms who had his spine shattered by a Varun mind probe. I buried kids who never learned what stars were. Don't tell me about lines, Kyle. There are no lines left. Kyle clenched his fists. And what about us? How long before we become the thing we hated? Drew stood taller, heavier, radiating something dangerous. We became that the day they made us crawl. I don't want to win, Kale. I want them to remember for 1,000 years. Kale stared at him for a long time, then left without another word. Mean. While the Varun were bleeding from the inside, the council met in a fortified orbiting citadel, far from their core worlds. Dozens of species represented, all terrified. He's just a human, roared the Varun warlord. One man. He's more than a man now, said the Dres ambassador. He's an idea, and ideas don't die easily. The room broke into shouting. Drew had become a myth. Children spoke his name in fear. Pirates swore by it. Freedom fighters tattooed his face on their arms. Whole colonies defected in his name. And worse, the humans still loyal to the old governments were getting swept up in the chaos. The line between resistance and terrorism was blurred beyond recognition on a forgotten moon deep in a system no one cared about. Drew stood before a group of new recruits, farmers, ex-cons, broken people with too much anger and too few options. He looked over them, his face hard, his eyes colder than vacuum. You came here for revenge, he said. Good revenge is honest. Revenge doesn't lie to you. But if you're here to feel better, leave now. You won't. No one moved. You'll kill people who didn't deserve it. You'll torch cities that once loved humans. You'll hear screaming in your sleep and feel nothing. That's what this war takes. Still, no one moved. Drew nodded. Then welcome to the Ashbourne. In private, Drew studied old maps, star charts, intercepted signals. The Varun were faltering. The cracks were growing. Civil unrest, riots on outer colonies, even there. And citizens were turning against the Empire. That's when Kyle returned with news Drew didn't expect. There's a rebel faction forming. Honest to ver. And defectors. Drew raised an eyebrow. Defectors, military officers, scientists, even nobles. They're turning on the council. Want peace, real peace. Drew leaned back. Why now? Kyle shrugged. Maybe they finally see the truth. Maybe they're scared of me, Drew said flatly. Kale didn't disagree. They want to talk, he added. With you? Drew's face twisted. Why? Because they think you can stop this before everything burns. Drew met them alone. He landed on Alaris 2 in the dead of night, walking through a windstorm, his coat flapping behind him like a banner of death. The Varun rebels were waiting, clean, polished, nervous. One stepped forward, female, high cheekbones, thin voice. Captain Haverson, I'm Leave Hein. I don't care, Drew said. She hesitated. We want peace. So did I, he snapped, before your kind turned Mars into a graveyard. She swallowed. We didn't order those attacks. You were silent. That was enough. We want to fix this. He stepped close, voice ice. You think this can be fixed? Buried my brother in dust so fine I had to scoop him with a shovel. There's no fixing this, there's only fire. But the killing is the only thing they understand. Lee looked into his eyes. What about the children? Drew didn't blink. You think they left ours alive? Silence. You're not here to stop me. He said, you're here to beg because you know what comes next. She didn't deny it. Drew stepped back. Tell your people, I'm not here for peace. I'm here for proof. When the last Varun monument falls, when your empire forgets what power feels like, then we talk. He left the meeting angrier than he arrived. Peace now. After all this, too late. The war was bigger than him, now bigger than the Ashborn. It was a sickness, and Drew was the symptom, the fever before the body dies that night. He stared at the stars again, wondering if this was what winning felt like, hollow, cold, exhausting. He didn't sleep, he just planned. Because he knew what came next. Var. On high command, the last stronghold, the head of the snake. Drew would cut it off, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to, because some empires only understand the taste of their own ashes. The galaxy wasn't watching anymore. It was holding its breath. Every news stream, every border system, every outpost and orbital ring. They weren't asking if Drew Haverson would strike again. They were asking where the man had become a living omen, a curse whispered among captains, prayed against by diplomats, and now he was heading for the jugular vein. On high command, underground, fortified, hidden beneath the black glass mountains of Aora Prime, it wasn't just a military center. It was the mind of the empire, the place where orders were given, where wars were calculated like currency. If Ver, on Prime, was the heart, Ura was the brain, and Drew was coming to cut it out. The Ashborn fleet was smaller, now tight, focused. The chaos had scattered most of their number. Some killed, others retired to whatever lives. Broken killers returned to only the core, remained the ones who didn't flinch. When the alarms screamed, Kyle stood in the war room with a dozen others, dirty, hardened. Every one of them had lost more than they could explain, and all of them had one thing in common: they followed Drew. He walked in unshaven, his armor dull, with a silent nod from him, and the room froze. We're going to Aora, he said. Kyle exhaled slowly. You're sure they think they're safe, deep buried, watching from their towers? Drew's eyes burned. We'll remind them what fear feels like. A murmur of agreement passed through the room. They'll have satellites, orbital shields, mine belts. Kale said, already accounted for. Drew replied, we found a hole in their magnetic grid. Took 2 years to spot it, 2 seconds to decide what to do with it. He activated a map. The path lit up black space, then deep inside asteroid fields, then under the planetary crust itself. We're going under them, Drew said, straight through the rock. We'll punch a hole beneath the command base. And then we turn their brain into glass. Someone laughed. It wasn't joy, it was disbelief. Kyle frowned. We won't make it out. Drew just nodded. No one objected. The operation began 3 days later. The ship was Ashfall, a drill cruiser built from a mining vessel Drew stole years ago, reinforced with hull plates, scavenged from a dozen species. It was a monster of a machine, slow, ugly, indestructible. They dropped into the asteroid field, scraping past space debris sharp enough to gut a battleship. No lights, no signals, only silence and fire. Drew sat at the console, his hand on the manual. Override, bring us in, he said. The ship groaned, the drill at its front whirred to life, cutting into the rock crust of Aora Prime like a saw through bone. Kyle sat beside him. You think it ends here? Drew didn't look over. It never ends. Kyle was quiet. A moment, you know. When I joined you, I wanted revenge. Now I don't know what I want. That's what war does. It takes your reason and replaces it with routine. Kyle gave a bitter smile. Sounds familiar. The drill took 12 hours to cut through the crust. Deeper they went, the hotter it got. Systems strained, hulls creaked, pressure screamed through the vents like ghosts. Then they hit metal. The base. Drew stood. Showtime. The breach was violent. Explosives lined the drill tunnel, blasting upward into the foundation of Var. On high command, the walls shook. Fire bloomed through corridors. Alarms howled. Soldiers poured from every hatch, trained, fast, precise. But they weren't ready for him. Drew moved like a force of nature. No wasted motion. One bullet, one kill. Grenades fell into rooms before doors opened. Lasers hissed past his shoulder, but nothing slowed him. Behind him, the Ashborn followed. Close combat, quick deaths. They knew the map, knew the lay. Out they'd studied this place for years. Kyle was bleeding. His shoulder was torn open, but he kept firing. Drew planted charges in the day. The core, the reactor, the upper tower. They didn't want control. They wanted Destruction in the command chamber. The last Varun admiral stood shaking hands. Raised, you're a human. He whispered. Drew raised his gun. Not anymore. The shot echoed through the steel halls like a bell of doom. The mountain exploded from orbit. Satellites caught the eruption, black smoke spiraling into the sky, glowing lava pouring from the cracked earth like the planet was bleeding from its skull. The Ashbourne shuttle barely escaped the collapse. Kyle collapsed onto the deck, wheezing. Drew stood silently watching the surface below melt into ruin, his face unreadable. Someone from the crew asked, "Is it over?" He didn't answer because he didn't know. In the days that followed, the Empire cracked without command. Their fleets broke into factions, civil wars ignited, whole species declared independence, peace talks fell apart, the galaxy became a storm of chaos, and through it all one name kept surfacing. Haverson. He had no titles, no throne, no medals, but his shadow stretched longer than any emperor's ever did. Back on a derelict station, hidden inside a gas giant, Drew sat alone. He hadn't spoken in days, not since Iraq. Kyle approached his arm in a sling. "We won," he said. Drew looked at him, tired, older than he had any right to be. "No," he replied, "we survived." Kale pulled up a chair. "So what now? Hide, run." Drew leaned forward. "Now we do the hardest thing." Kale raised an eyebrow, "which is disappear." Kale blinked seriously. "They want a warlord." Drew said, "A monster, a villain to rally against. If I stay, I become the new empire. Different name, same chains. And if you vanish," Drew looked at him, "then maybe they build something better in the ashes." Kyle laughed bitterly. "You're talking about hope." "No. Drew said quietly, "I'm talking about silence." He left the Ashbourne that night, took a scout ship, no destination, no beacon, just darkness. Some say he died in the void, others claim he became a god in the deep sectors, but the truth was simpler. He was tired, and his war was over. The galaxy had no center anymore. The Varun Empire, once the unshakable spine of order across hundreds of systems, was fractured into splinters. Its loyalists squabbled over scraps of territory, screaming for obedience, while their worlds tore themselves apart. Pirates swarmed, factions rose and fell like dying stars. Civil wars flared in places that hadn't seen blood in a generation, and behind it all was a silence louder than any explosion. Drew Haverson had vanished. Some thought he was dead, others believed he was hiding, rebuilding, waiting. Every month rumors surfaced. He was spotted on a mining colony near Tyros. 5. No. He joined a cult in the dust fields of Sector 19. No. He'd become a weaponized ghost construct in some deep AI lab. None were true, but none were completely false, either, because the war he started wasn't about him anymore. Kale now led what remained of the Ashbourne. What had started as a knife, revenge, was now a scattered set of blades carving different wounds. Some Ashbourne cells became mercenaries, others turned full-on terrorists. A few tried to become protectors, unlikely defenders of civilian systems that had no military left. Kyle had chosen something harder. He was trying to build on a forgotten moon called Arcos 9. Kyle established what he called the core, not a government, not a militia, just people, people with scars, fighters, technicians, refugees, exvar, an ex-Ashbourne, all drawn together by one truth: they couldn't go back to what came before. They didn't believe in utopia, but they believed in not repeating. Kyle stood in the central dome, wind howling against the outer shields as engineers laid the foundation for a new generator. He wore no insignia, just a coat and a pulse pistol on his hip. Enough to be respected, not warped. A voice came through on his comms. It was Raina, one of the last surviving Ashbourne tacticians. Convoy from Eros Belt made it through the gravity storm, supplies coming in. Kyle acknowledged losses, 2 wounded, 1 missing. Find them. He cut the line and walked the perimeter. The moon was barren, lifeless, perfect for staying hidden, but he knew they weren't invisible, not for long. Eyes were always watching, especially now back on Varun-controlled space. A new figure had emerged. Her name was Commander Isari, young for her rank, brutal beyond her years. She'd lost family in Drew's war, and she swore vengeance, but she was smart. She didn't waste fleets chasing ghosts. She studied the Ashbourne, tracked supply routes, analyzed patterns where Drew fought with rage. Isari fought with cold logic. She knew where Kyle was, she just hadn't struck. Yet she was waiting for something or someone. Kyle knew it was coming. He stood in the command tent of the core, staring at a map of systems, too many variables, too many threats, and one cold truth: they couldn't fight forever. He turned to Raina. "We need to find him." She raised an eyebrow. Kyle nodded. If Isari is building momentum, if she moves on us, we won't survive it alone. Rena looked away. You sure he's still alive? Kale didn't answer right away, then softly, he's not the kind of man who dies quietly far from Arcos 9 in a sector where stars were more myth than light. A freighter drifted alone power. Low hull scarred inside. Drew Haverson sat in the dark. He hadn't spoken to anyone in over a year, hadn't touched a weapon. In 6 months, the only sound was the hum of the engines and his own breathing. He wasn't hiding, he was waiting for the weight to leave his chest. It never did. Each night he saw their faces, people. He'd killed people. He hadn't saved the girl on Titan, with a melted face. The Varun child crawling from rubble, his niece laughing in Martian. Dust. He didn't regret what he did, but he regretted needing to. A knock on the airlock broke the silence. It wasn't possible. He was 100 light years off any known route. He drew his pistol automatically, instincts dull, but not dead. The hatch opened slowly. Kyle stepped through, covered in sand, eyes sunken from exhaustion. Took us a long time to find you, he said. Drew didn't lower the gun. You shouldn't have come. Too bad, Kyle replied. I need you. Drew stared, then said, I'm done. Kyle stepped closer. She's coming. He's sorry. She's not like the rest. She's not making speeches, she's making moves, tactical, surgical. She's already taken back 4 systems. Drew looked away. I've got kids on Arrows 9. Kale said, kids who never held a gun, engineers, medics, families. They believe in something, and she's going to burn them all to prove a point. Silence. Stretched. You said the fire ends with you, Kyle added. You were wrong. Drew closed his eyes. He'd started it, and maybe that meant he had to end it the right way. A week later, the Ashbourne signal went out. 1 tone, 4 notes, a code. They all knew. Rally across abandoned systems, in caves and ships and shattered cities. The old symbols flickered back to life. Ashbourne survivors stared at screens and didn't believe it at first. But then they heard the voice. This is Haverson. Drew said, last call. 1 final burn back on Arcos 9. The Corps prepared for war, not for conquest, for survival. Isari had launched her fleet, 10 destroyers, 1 flagship. Precision movement, not a revenge attack, a cleansing. Kyle paced the command dome. Idarina's voice crackled. 12 hours. Any word from Drew? A pause. Nothing. Kyle didn't show his worry. He'd seen Drew walk through death before, but this time it felt different. Far above her, cloaked in a magnetic storm, Drew's ship waited, not with a fleet, not with fire, but with something worse. A virus. Back doors Drew had planted years ago in the Varun fleet, comm systems buried under layers of code. A flicker, a worm now activated. He whispered into his console, lights out. And every ship in Isari's fleet went. Blind alarms blared, screens went dead, weapons refused to fire, engines stalled. And then Drew spoke through every Varun channel. I told you you wanted war, now watch your empire fall again. Back on Arcos 9, Kyle watched the fleet spin in confusion, then a blip on radar. 1 ship descending. Drew. He landed in silence, no ceremony, just a man in a black coat stepping into the dust. Kyle met him at the edge of the pad. Drew said nothing. Kyle didn't ask anything. They just walked together toward the fire again. The skies over Arrows 9 burned silver. The Varun fleet, crippled but still enormous, hung in orbit like a shattered crown. Systems flickered, engines rebooted. Isari's flagship Eminence was limping, its main cannons cold, its shielding fried. But it was still a beast, and she wasn't turning back. She had something Drew Haverson didn't. Desperation. Inside the core, the air was heavy. Engineers scrambled, weapons were calibrated by exhausted hands. Children were moved underground. Kale paced with a fury that matched the storm clouds forming above. Drew stood in silence beside him. You really think they'll come down without air support? Kale asked. They're too proud not to. Drew replied. Kale scowled. Even after you killed their tech. Especially after. Isari's forces began atmospheric descent at 0-3 arrows. Aero 2 drop cruisers, armored platoon, no air cover, no drones, just boots and guns. Old school Uplos war. She didn't want clean, she wanted blood. Drew checked the rifle he hadn't used since Aora Prime, scratched matte black. 1 modification, a phrase etched into the side, forgive nothing. Rena came through the blast doors carrying a crate of plasma grenades. Final count, she asked. Coil 200 fighters, give or take. We've got the terrain, they've got the numbers. She raised an eyebrow toward Drew, and the monster he doesn't count as a fighter coil muttered, "He's something else." The first impact shook the ground. Drop cruisers landed like gods, slamming fists into stone dust clouds. Swallowed the outer ridges, black armored Varun commandos deployed in perfect lines, flawless discipline. They moved as one, rifles drawn, visors lit with scanning HUD, the cores. Fighters ragtag and angry hid in trenches, caves, rock tunnels. Home made mines, rigs, traps, every inch of land wired to kill. It wasn't a battle, it was a last breath before the scream. The first shots cracked like bone. Ashborn fighters opened fire from cliffsides Ver, and troops responded with suppressive bursts, pushing forward in tactical waves. The rocky terrain turned into a maze of blood and smoke. Kyle led the left flank, 3 kills in 5 minutes. Then a blast to the shoulder knocked him to the ground. He rose, still fighting. Drew moved like he'd never stopped. He was fire in human form, calculated, merciless. One shot between helmets, a grenade rolled under a tank, followed by a controlled smile. He tore through enemy lines with surgical rage. They said later, it was like watching a storm with a name. Isari's men had been trained to kill Ashborn, not him. In the command tent, Rihanna listened to the screams pouring through comms. Her fingers trembled over the detonator she never wanted to use. Behind her, a boy, barely 12, stood with a medical kit. "Why are we fighting?" he asked. She couldn't answer. Outside, the world fell apart. Kyle regrouped near the southern barricade. Smoke made it hard to breathe. He was missing half a boot and most of a plan. "Where's Haverson?" he yelled over the gunfire. No one knew because Drew had gone forward alone. Isari stepped off her shuttle like a queen walking into hell, flanked by elite guards. She marched through fire toward the core's final wall, the one they said couldn't be breached. She saw the bodies, Ashborn civilians, her own men, all dead. She didn't blink. "This ends today," she said to no one. Then she saw him across the valley through the smoke and chaos. Drew Haverson. He stood tall, rifle, low armor, scarred, a figure from nightmares and legends. Their eyes met. The air grew colder. Isari raised her hand. Her men spread out. Didn't move. He didn't have to. The two armies clashed in a final desperate push. Hand to hand, no tech, just rage, steel, blood, dirt in every breath. Kale reached the command wall just in time to see Drew and Isari collide. A flash of knives, gunfire, sparks on metal. She was faster. He was meaner. She drew blood. First a slash across his ribs. He responded with a broken nose, and 2 ribs crushed under his fist. They weren't fighting for victory. They were fighting because nothing else was left. Rhea watched from a drone feed. Her finger hovered over the emergency payload. If they lost the wall, she'd vaporize the entire sector. She didn't want to, but she would. Isari stabbed Drew in the thigh. He tackled her into a wall. She grabbed his neck. He bit her hand. They fell together into the mud, choking on dirt, spitting venom and pain. "You turned us into monsters," she screamed. "We always were." He growled. Then he reached for the knife still in his leg, pulled it, and drove it into her chest. Silence, only the wind. Isari's eyes widened, then closed. Drew stumbled back, panting, bleeding from 7 places. He dropped the blade. Kyle reached him seconds later. "It's over," he said. Drew looked at him. No. He looked past the smoke, the bodies, the crater that had been their last defense. "It's just quiet now." Then he collapsed. They found him breathing barely. Rihanna kept the payload, locked the boy beside her, didn't ask any more questions. In the aftermath, the Varun fleet withdrew, leaderless, beaten, not destroyed, but done. The Corps held some. How Kale took over as full commander, reluctantly. Rihanna stayed, so did many others, but Drew didn't wake up for 3 weeks. When he did, he didn't speak. Not for a long time. They tried to give him medals. He refused. Tried to name a defense grid after him. He laughed once, and never again. Tried to hold a parade. He left before sunrise. A year passed. The galaxy began to rebuild. The Ashborn faded. Some stayed protectors, others just vanished. No one ever saw Drew Haverson again. But on distant worlds, in cities, clawing their way back from ashes, you could still find his words etched in broken walls. "You want war? Then watch your worlds burn. And next to it, smaller, fresher, newer, you want peace? Then bleed for it." Kyle stood at the edge of the landing pad on Arcos 9, looking out over the new settlement. The core had grown, structures rising from the rubble like stubborn weeds. Children, tentative smiles, and people carving out a future they only dared to dream of. But Kale's eyes were on the horizon, where the sky met the metal horizon, and the weight of the past lingered like smog after the carnage and loss A fragile calm had descended. The Varun had pulled back the Ashbourne hay. Splintered civilian systems cautiously, tentatively reached out. It was peaceful, but Cale could feel the tremor in that peace, a heartbeat deeper than the calm drew. Haverson remained absent. Rumors whispered about him, living as a hermit on a distant rock, a mercenary for hire, a ghost ship captain. Worse, dead Kyle didn't know which to believe. Every theory sounded believable, but none offered hope. On a rare, quiet morning, Kyle walked through the settlements, marketplace stalls selling recycled tech, roasted rations, crude textiles. Traders bartered with locals. Children chased stray animals. For the first time, the Corps felt more home than hide. Out he paused at a tent where an old an engineer, worked side by side with human mechanics. They didn't exchange a single word. Trust was still a fragile thing, but Kyle saw the tension ease in their shoulders. Progress born of necessity, not reconciliation. He shoved aside those thoughts and walked toward the central dome. Today was meeting day. Allies from 4 systems would arrive, bringing intel, resources, and maybe, just maybe, a chance at building governance. Civilian governance. No militias inside the dome. Tables had been pushed together to form a makeshift plenary chamber. Hollow screens showed stock levels, delivery schedules, regional stability maps. Survivors, scientists, former Ashbourne leaders, even a few VAR undefectors. All eyes turned to Kyle as he entered. Morning, he said. He motioned them to sit. We're not here to talk about war, we're here to talk about peace. That doesn't mean comfort, it means accountability. A scientist raised her hand. What about the Ashbourne cells still raiding Varun territory? Kidnappings, reprisals? Kyle nodded. We've been tracking them. Some are ex-military, taking what they see as vengeance. We can't pretend all humans are innocent. We need to rein them in or neutralize them. A representative from the OS belt, a stocky man with mechanical facial plates, spoke up. Our people harbor deep resentment. We can't just forgive. The wounds are fresh, but we can channel that energy into rebuilding, not raiding. Kyle took a breath. That's what we're trying to do, but forgiveness is earned, not demanded. They talked into the afternoon. Infrastructure, resource, fairness, military boundaries, arrests for raiders, compensation programs. None of it easy, but Cale saw for the first time that war's children were attempting governance. A beginning night came, and Cale returned to his sparse quarters. He looked at a photo pinned to the wall, a grainy capture of Ashbourne fighters, including him and Riina, standing victorious on the rubble-strewn plains of Ura Prime. He traced a finger over his younger face, a man unbroken by guilt. But that man was gone. Riina knocked and stepped inside, quiet in her hand. A day to chip. Something came in from Deep Space Scouts, an unregistered ship near Sector 19. No, if she looked at Kyle and said, could be Ashbourne, could be Ver, unloyalists, could be Drew. Kyle said softly, his stomach twisted. Riina exhaled. He's alive. The next morning, Kyle summoned the settlement's governing council. People listened witty-eyed as he addressed them. As of last night, we have confirmed intel. Haverson's alive. Ships, hull matches older Ashbourne designs. Hull markings are military grade, but beaten. If he wants us, he'll come. A woman from the Terran delegation frowned. What if he doesn't come to us? What if he's on a vendetta? Kyle bit his lip. Then we face it. We stand together. We're no longer hiding from our ghosts. If he's out there, he's still powerful, but he's not invincible. Heavy silence. Then someone nodded. Determination flickered. They'd regained enough hope to want justice, even if that meant confronting ghosts. Kyle's private quarters were empty. When he returned that evening, on the table lay 2 items, an encrypted hollow message from Drew and a battered VAR. On communicator, Kyle swallowed hard, then activated the hollow. Drew's silhouette flickered into life. He wore an old coat, stained and patched. His eyes, though dimmed, still held fire. Kyle Draw's voice was gravel and steel. I need sanct. Worry. Kyle's heart thudded on arrows 9. Drew nodded, face half hidden. They rebuilt. I lost my way after I did things I thought I could live with, but the ghosts followed. They never stopped. I need silence. I need to make sure what comes next doesn't undo what you're trying to build. Kyle's throat was tight. I'll have safe passage ready, but I need your word. No reprisals, no more war. Drew paused. I don't know who I'd be without war, but I'll try. The connection went dead. Kyle stared at the blank hollow, unsure if ghosts could truly be silenced, but willing to try. 3 days later, a battered scout ship arrived under cloak. It landed outside the dome at dawn. People watched with cautious eyes. Rena stood guard beside Kale as the hatch hissed. Drew stepped out, less majestic than rumors painted him, frail, haunted, but raw humanity in his posture. Kyle stepped forward. They stared a moment, no handshake, no hug. They'd never been friends, but they'd fought together, shared loss, known each other's shadows. Kale nodded. Go inside, we'll take care of you. Inside the council chamber, Kale introduced Drew. Some turned away, others stared with anger or fear. No applause, no hatred, just silence. Kale spoke up. This man saved us from Varanet. He almost died for that, but he's also a war criminal, a man who ordered civilian strikes. We're not honoring him, but we are giving him a chance to live, to redeem, to build, not destroy. Drew bowed his head. I've taken years of lives. I've stolen galaxies. I don't deserve forgiveness. I just want to live. Avaran defector rose. Her voice trembled. Do you think you can live with Peace Haverson? She used his full name formally. Scorn honesty. Can you look at us humans in Varan and not ache? Drew swallowed. I don't know yet, but I want to try. More silence. After a heartbeat, the Stockios belt man spoke up. We give you a window, but know this, we're watching. Drew nodded. I expected nothing less. Weeks passed. Drew moved into a small habitat outside the core. No guards, no fanfare, but whispers followed him. He was seen helping at repairs. He was seen nursing a Varan infant back to health. He was seen dragging debris from quake zones, not because anyone asked, but because he couldn't stop. Some looked at him with horror, others with awe. He became a symbol, broken, maybe still dangerous, but maybe unstoppable in redemption. Coil watched all this, weary. A man like Drew could rip it down just as easily as build it up. One afternoon, Coil was called to Arcos 9's communication center. He entered to see Reyna watching a map, multiple trade convoys scheduled between core and neighboring systems. She gestured at pickup routes marked red. They were attacked, full loot extraction. No survivors. Kyle stared. Unloyalists. Reyna shook her head. Number signals, human, same comm signatures used by Ashbourne's splinter cells. Kyle slammed his fist on the table. So war never left us. Reyna turned, and guess whose comms flagged near. By Kale closed his eyes. Drew. They looked at each other. Hope and dread mixed. He found Drew in the training yard, running laps, stamina drills, sand-drenched clothes, face like a storm. Drew glanced at Kyle. Sweat dripped. Things going wrong. Kyle showed him the data. Drew swallowed. Stop the drill, it's real. He said, Ashorn cells, they're recruiting weapons, moving out using your name as rally cry. Kyle stared. We're rebuilding you. We're supposed to end that. Drew closed his eyes, then fell to his knees on the sand. Quiet tears. Build. I wanted this, he whispered, wanted to atone. But I never left the war behind. I'm built for destruction. Kyle knelt. Then build something else with us. Show them there's life after war. Drew shook his head. How? I don't even know how to live without ashes. Kyle rested a hand on his shoulder. They start by stopping them. Night fell. They walked through the settlement under dim lights. Rena and two others followed, a Varan defector scientist and an Ashbourne scout sent by Kyle. They boarded Drew's old scout ship crew of 5 cold weapons tucked under coats, comms encrypted. They took off under scramble lights. No announcements, no warning, just silent purpose. The ship crept through empty corridors. Drew led, silent weapon raised. They reached a hangar. Stark ships, missing supplies, gone. Welds cut loose, signs of hurried escape. Rena shook her head. They're gone. Drew clenched his jaw. Number. I know where they're heading. The Varun defector checked signals. Sector 22, Rhea sector, old pirate caves. Kyle tapped a map. Terminal. We'll need clearance to dock. And no one knows you're alive. Drew stared at the console. Then we can't ask. They jumped to Rhea sector and entered the coordinates. A dark planet with half its surface burned away by previous orbital bombardment. Cavern mouths dotting the crater fields. They docked inside one with hidden approach protocols. They walked through tunnels, suit sensors droning low each step, a fragile mixture of hope and regret. Then came a muffled voice. Haverson. They froze. A man in black fatigue stepped out. Some greaves and plates recognizable from Varan gear stolen earlier. He had cold eyes. Didn't think you'd come, he said. Drew stared. Your bishop. The man smiled thin. Went by Raymond before joined the Ashbourne. After Aora. I need a purpose. Kale stepped forward. You want to fight? Bishop laughed. You built a sanctuary for babies and farmers, but the world wants power. We lost too much. The only way forward is the same way back. You teach weakness, I teach them strength. Rena stepped closer. And you'll use his name. He tilted his head. He's alive on Arcos. That's fuel. Inspiration. Kyle's hand dropped to his sidearm. We'll dismantle this today. Stand down. Bishop shook his head. Never you leave now, Drew, said Bishop. Hardened, never, it's war again. They clashed in the cavern tunnels. Kyle fired blue Bishops, guard off, Rena neutralized bombs. Bishop set Drew, faced Bishop in close quarters. Bone slammed blow after blow. Bishop was strong, but Drew was relentless. He finally forced Bishop back, weapon drawn to the throat. Call it off. Drew growled. Bishop smirked. They're already fighting on Acros, you're too late. With those words he kicked off a grenade rack tunnel. Exploded bonds, shook dust rained, they ran, they escaped as tunnels collapsed, communications were cut. Their hull integrity weakened, radiation alarms blinked, they reached ship engines roared to life. Just as behind them, the cavern entrance collided inward, they jumped, escaped back on Acros, alarms sounded, fighting erupted. Ashborn cells launched rocket pods at core outer walls. Civilians ran plasma pulse arcs, jumped across barricades. Kyle activated defense turrets. Drew emerged onto walkways, bullet-proof, bloodstained. He didn't wait for orders. He moved across trenches, slamming Veronade ammo plants to explode. He stormed shields with bloody fists. He became war incarnate. He held his name as a weapon again hours later. Silence returned. Bodies smoldered. The settlement trembled under broken shields and craters. Kyle counted losses. Dead Ashborn, dead civilians, broken trust. But the cells were gone. Victory, no victory without cost. He found Drew in the mess hall, exhausted, limping, eyes hollow. Kyle knelt. It stopped. Drew looked at him. It didn't stop. We just bought time. He pressed his hand to a scorch-marked floor. This was the dream. Kyle stared at him. Dreams get broken. Drew broke eye contact. Then we rebuild again. No credit ceremony, no cheering. They worked into the night, rebuilding shields, burying the dead, reinstalling faith. Drew refused attention. He worked alongside station migrants, patching walls, carrying supplies. He spoke to kids who saw a monster doing kindness. He taught them repair. Asked nothing in return. One night, a child approached him, small bruised leg, but curious eyes. Are you the man who burned Varan Prime? She asked. Drew stopped, breathed deep. Yes. She waited. Did it make the world better? He knelt. Sometimes war is the price of silence, but peace is the price of blood. The girl stared. I'm sorry for the blood. Drew said, I hope he couldn't finish. She nodded and walked away. Months passed. Trade routes flourished. Undefectors oversaw tech rebuilding. Cultural exchange began. Not harmony, but contact. Suspicious, fragile. Maybe enough. Ashborn shards had dwindled. Most either vanished or joined the rebuilding. A few still whispered in the dark. Kyle tracked them, arrested when needed. No trials, yet just containment. Peace was imperfect. Drew stayed on Arrows 9 for a year. Then on a cold morning he was gone. They said he took nothing but a black coat and a rifle. Kyle didn't mourn. He understood too well. Long after, when the settlement had a name, Hope World, New Iris, the plaque in the main square read, in memory of those we lost, the survivors who build, and the man who showed it. That peace is not the absence of war, but the presence of courage. It didn't mention Drew Haverson by name, but scratched beneath in faint letters. You want war, then watch your worlds burn, and below, that grainy but clear peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from scars, years past time, softened some edges, but it never erased the scars. The galaxy that Drew Haverson once ignited had shifted not into peace, but into balance. There were still borders, there were still weapons, but there were also agreements, trade pacts, shared colonies. It wasn't unity, it was tolerance. And sometimes that was enough. On New Ares, the settlement once called Arcos, 9 thrived buildings made from old Ashborn metal now housed schools, clinics, forums. Children ran across fields where bunkers used to stand. Engineers from both human and backgrounds co-managed energy grids and shared scientific breakthroughs. But even as the world thrived, it remembered at the center of the city stood the old command dome, preserved untouched. Inside every wall held holographs and images of what came before, burned flags, peace charters, video of the Varan riots, images of Ashborn craters, and always Drew not worshipped. Remembered some nights Kyle walked those halls alone. He'd taken no title beyond director, refused medals. He oversaw what he had to: security, stability, communication with outside systems. He left leadership of the settlement to a council of civilian scientists, and even one Varan child who had grown into a fierce administrator. Kyle's hair had gone gray, his joints etched, but his mind was sharp. And every year he made a single recording, a letter to someone who might never hear it. Drew Kale said into the mic voice, low, steady, worn. Another year, Another orbit. Kids here are smarter than we ever were. Stronger too, we got a full medical system now, water reclamation's up 30%. Oh, and that trade agreement with the Sarin Collective went through, even got them to admit their soldiers committed war crimes during the occupation. Small steps, but we'll take them. He paused. They still whisper about you, not with fear, with questions. Did you ever mean to stop? Did you ever feel peace? Or were you just tired? Kyle looked at the mic, unsure if it even transmitted anymore. I don't know if you're alive, but I do know this: you changed us. You forced us to see that survival isn't enough, that vengeance doesn't satisfy, and that sometimes the only way to rebuild is to break everything first. He turned it off far across the stars, in a region known only as the Laddies, a network of abandoned asteroid towns and exiled warships. An old man walked into a cantina. The room fell quiet. He didn't carry a gun, just a satchel and a data pad. He sat in the corner, ordered water, listened to the conversations. Raiders talked about lost causes, traders complained about tariffs. A young man bragged about torching a civilian freighter. The old man raised an eyebrow when the young raider laughed about slitting the throat of Varun priest. The old man stood. You proud of that? He asked. The boy turned, sneered. Who the hell are you, old man? Someone who remembers what war really costs. The boy scoffed. You going to lecture me? No. The man said, I'm going to bury you. He moved before anyone else did. The boy was on the ground in seconds. Windpipe, crushed, not dead, just silenced. The old man turned to the rest of the room. You think violence makes you powerful. It doesn't, it just makes you hollow. Someone in the back stood, an older woman. She stared at the man. You're him. She whispered, you're Haverson. He didn't deny it. She stepped forward slowly. Why come back now? He looked at her. Because I made a mess, and I need to clean it up. Over the next months, Drew moved through the fringes alone, quiet. He found the remaining Ashbourne cells that had turned rogue, the ones feeding chaos, trading on his name. He dismantled them, not with fire, but with presence. Some he persuaded, others he fought, but everywhere he went, he left behind truth. The war is over, we lost, and we lived, that's enough. On New Eris, Kale received a message, encrypted, no origin trace, just one line, I'm done running. Attached was a set of coordinates, old mining colony, unclaimed space neutral zone. Kyle raided. 3 times he packed light. When Kale arrived, the world was barren. Winds swept one structure, a cabin with solar panels, crude filters for air and water. Drew sat outside, older, now hair, silver lines on his face, deep like trenches. But his eyes were alive. Kyle walked up, no words at first. Then you came back. Drew nodded. Didn't think I would. Kyle looked around. This it's enough. They sat, shared water, looked up at stars. Neither had time to appreciate before. Finally, Kyle asked, you think it was worth it? Drew was quiet. A long time. I used to think only fire could change the galaxy, that war was language, that the loudest one lived longest. He exhaled. I was wrong. Fire doesn't teach, it just burns. Kyle looked down. But peace doesn't come without a price. No, Drew agreed. But maybe that price isn't lives, maybe it's letting go. They talked all night, not about war, about silence, memory loss at dawn. Kyle stood. You coming back? Drew shook his head. I can't lead anymore. I've done enough damage. Kyle nodded. Then stay here, rest. But if we ever need you. Drew met his eyes. I'll come. Kyle returned to New Ares quietly. No announcements, no explanations. Life continued. Drew was never seen again. But each year, Kyle returned to that cabin, sometimes alone, sometimes with a trainee. A child who needed answers. Drew would be there, not waiting, just present. And each time the galaxy moved on a little more, not healed but breathing alive. And in the sky above New Ares, satellites beamed one simple broadcast, a quote engraved on every frequency, every language. You want war, then watch your worlds burn, and beneath it, in Drew Haverson's own final words, you want peace, then be ready to pay for it. Every day, with choices, with mercy, with restraint. It's harder than war, but it's worth